Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for coming to our event. I'm Emily Verbinski. I'm from the League of Women Voters. I'm our membership chair. So a little bit about us. We're a nonpartisan group founded 100 years ago with the core mission of empowering voters and defending democracy. The League encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy for education and advocacy. Membership is open to everyone, not just women. So please don't hesitate to approach me or any of our members here if you're interested in supporting or joining our organization. I'd also like to thank our co-sponsors, which are AAUW, which is the American Association of University Women, and Activate. AAUW is also a 100-year-old organization that is committed to making a significant impact on education and equity for all women and girls. AAUW works to remove barriers and develop opportunities to enable women and girls to reach their full potential. Membership information is available from AAUW members here tonight or on their website. And then Activate is a local nonprofit organization entirely of volunteers with a deep passion to make Sheboygan the best place in Wisconsin, the United States, and the world. Through the power of civic awareness, collaboration, and fun, Activate works to improve the quality of life in Sheboygan and safeguard the community from forces of apathy, inaction, and exclusion. And also, special shout out to Activate for our Halloween candy voting activity. So you should have all gotten a ballot. Did anyone not get one? Great. If you haven't voted yet, vote for one candy, and then we have a collection basket up here, and the rest of that activity will happen later tonight. I'd also like to thank Trey Jacobson, the owner of Jake's Cafe, for letting us use the space. And finally, a warm welcome to and huge thank you to our guest speaker, Sara Eskrich. Eskrich. Okay. She's the Executive Director of Democracy Found, a Wisconsin-based nonpartisan initiative committed to revitalizing democracy, and she also serves as the Senior Advisor for the Institute for Political Innovation. She previously served on the Madison Common Council and currently serves as the Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District Commissioner. She's a member of the Madison Downtown Rotary, the Hone Group, and E. Ritter and Company Family Council. Her career includes roles in public and private sectors, including at Deloitte Consulting, the UW Population Health Institute, Kids Forward, and the Wisconsin Alliance for Women's Health, and the City of Boston. So everyone wants to welcome Sara.
I think I'm supposed to stand over here. All right. Thank you everyone for being here. Back when we were not worrying about wearing masks inside for that short period of time earlier this summer, to speak to the Rotary Club, and then we did a presentation after at Jake's Cafe here. So I see some familiar faces from that evening and some new ones. So thank you all for coming out this evening. I hope that for those of you who have heard this presentation before, I'll try to update it slightly, but also ask for you to just listen again. Sometimes it's helpful to hear things for a second time. Different things will resonate, and I hope different questions will come up for you. So my goal is to leave lots of time for us to have questions and conversation about this as soon as I give you the overview of the topic. And then we'll spend as much time as we need to having conversation. So with that, I've just got a couple, I promised just a few slides for you today to complement my presentation. And the first one, I think, will resonate with you all, regardless of whether or not you've been in politics and policy work as long as I have, which is, a decade of policy work before working for the past few years in democracy. So if you can go to the next slide, Chet. So this is supposed to be a Venn diagram. And you will see that in this Venn diagram, there's no current intersection, right? Which is to say that this pretty much sums up the problem. This sums up what I'm trying to tell you today is not working about our democratic system of government and our representative democracy, or republic, as others would call it. So the problem is that our elected officials, if they're doing their job in the way that most of us want and need them to do their job, they're at risk of losing that job. So that's a really fundamentally bad design, right? We would not design anything about any of our institutions or organizations that we're a part of that would have these sorts of underlying results driving them. So the fundamental question is why? How did we get to this point that our democracy represents this non-intersecting Venn diagram? And so if you flash to the next slide, I will just quickly kind of direct you to the book on this topic, which is The Politics Industry. Now, The Politics Industry was written by Catherine Gale, who's a businesswoman from Germantown, Wisconsin, actually, and Michael Porter from Harvard Business School. And Catherine, for the first time, really meaningfully applied traditional business tools of analysis to politics as an industry. And for me, as someone who had worked in politics and in policy work, but also have a bit of a business background, it was like this light bulb was going off when I read her underlying thesis that actually came out back in 2017 and led me to doing this work for the past few years. Because ultimately, the theory is one that whether or not you have a business background, I think we all can understand that in healthy industries, competition is what drives results, because competition is what makes you make better products and be held accountable for delivering to your customers. So there's the fundamental problem in politics is that there doesn't seem to be this degree of responding to customer demand and customer dissatisfaction, right? So Congress's approval rating never really goes above 20%. And we just learned in the Marquette Law School poll today that the one thing that Democrats and Republicans can agree on right now in Wisconsin is that we don't like politicians, right? We universally do not support anyone who is leading in office right now. That's what the high level takeaway poll today was. So we have this frustration with our politics, and yet in the 2020 election, which was one of the highest turnout elections in recent history, effectively 10% of the population elected 86% of our Congress. Right? Let me just repeat that math because it makes zero sense, right? 10% of the population effectively elected 86% of our Congress, of our members of the House of Representatives. So again, how does that happen? And fundamentally, what do we do about it? So before I go further, I've kind of alluded to this, that we're going to talk about the system today. We're not going to talk about the red team or the blue team because we're not on either of those teams. In fact, Democracy Found came together with people who represent the red team and the blue team very differently, people who have supported different candidates and different policies, and said, we don't agree on those things, but we can agree that our system isn't working well and we should come together to fix that. So from our very beginning, that has been critical to our mission of both being bipartisan, both in the design of the changes that we're working on, but also, and somewhat as meaningfully in politics, also in the perception of who's involved and who's taking part in this effort that we work on. So what I would kind of assert to you today to really drive that point home is that the root cause of our political dysfunction is not red team or blue team. The root cause that continues to endure across all election cycles, and again, across all administrations, red or blue administration, right, is that these perverted rules of the game of our political system are driving bad results in governing. So the rules are actually making, you could call it prisoners of senators and representatives themselves, because the only thing they can do, again, if they want to get reelected in our current system, is basically lockstep allegiance with their side of the divide. So what do we do about that, right? How do we change these rules to free up our members of Congress to do what we want them to do, to represent us when they're in Washington, D.C.? And what I will argue tonight is it's not some of the rules that we've heard about so often. It's not gerrymandering, it's not the Electoral College, it's not even the fact that we don't have term limits, and it's not even money in politics. If we look at the system from a competition lens, right, if we are underlying this shared premise of competition creates accountability. This politics industry theory that was created by Catherine Gale really articulates two fundamental systems problems in the design of our elections. And they're both our biggest obstacle, but opportunity because we can change them. So if we go to the next slide, our two major structural problems that really have been hiding in plain sight are these two things. The first is party primaries. And I would expect that many of you who are here today, who have been involved in civic processes and league governance and elections for a long time, understand this more than most people. But for most of us, we might not think about it, but we do know that most elections are decided in the primary. So most candidates in primary elections are pulled further to the right or further to the left than most of us really want. So what this means is, as I said, in 86% of our races for Congress, the election was decided in the primary because whoever wins that party primary is virtually guaranteed to win that seat because that seat is deemed non-competitive for one party or the other, right? So whoever votes in the party primary is determining who gets elected. So that's a problem because that means that a very small few are determining who gets elected. So that's a problem of representation, right? But it's also a problem of governing. So the influence of that party primary, of that system's design of how we vote, influences how our elected officials behave when they're in Washington, D.C. And if you think about it, it's frustrating, but it's rational. So that structure, right, if you can play a thought experiment with me for a moment, imagine you are a federal politician, and you're serving Sheboygan in Congress, and you're presented with some compromise, consensus-oriented solution on one of our nation's biggest problems. Pick whatever problem you care about. You heard from my background, I particularly care about healthcare, but you could choose whatever issue you care about. We all know there are common sense things that we could do to make that problem better, right? That frankly, both sides agree on. And behind closed doors, politicians will tell you both sides agree on that particular common sense, consensus-oriented change to that really pressing national problem. But when they go to vote on that consensus-oriented, compromise, bipartisan piece of legislation, they have to ask themselves a set of questions about whether or not they should vote for it, right? And the questions, unfortunately, are not the questions we would think they would be, right? We might think that the questions are, is this good policy? Is it going to do what it says it's going to do, right? Or even, do the majority of my constituents like this policy? Would they want me to vote for this? Because the only question they have to ask themselves because of the electoral system is, if I vote for this policy, if I vote for this consensus-oriented solution, will I make it back through my party primary? And if the answer to that question is no, which it virtually always is on the most complicated, national challenges, then the rational incentive is not to vote for that piece of consensus-oriented legislation because you will be primaried, right? We all know this. It's not just a noun anymore, it's a verb. We are going to primary you. And the reason we're going to primary you is because you didn't stay in lockstep gridlock, right? With perfection, with ideology, with black and white solutions that our side of the divide thinks are best. You tried to work in that consensus-oriented realm that so many of us have to do every day in our lives, right? But if you do that, you'll be threatened with a primary. So party primaries create this really challenging problem for politicians who want to solve problems because they can't, right? So we don't get any results in Congress because they can't vote for results in Congress without getting primary. So that's one of the primary reasons that we don't get results in governing. So the second problem that I'll talk to you about tonight is this second one, which is to say we don't get results in Congress because of this primary problem, but then we also don't have accountability for not getting results. And the reason we don't have accountability for not getting results is because of plurality voting. And again, this is something that most people have never heard of because it's just kind of normal to us. It's the way we've done elections in this country since it was founded. Because as you all know, when our country was founded, there weren't a lot of other examples of functioning representative democracy. So we took an example from British countryside elections, which was to say, in British countryside elections at the time, you won by getting the most votes, not necessarily a majority of votes. So in a three-way race, you could win under plurality voting with 34% of the vote. So if you think about it, that means that 66% of the population preferred a different candidate, but those candidates didn't win because someone won with 34% of the vote. So again, this doesn't sound very fair or representative, but what it really does is it creates these really bizarre barriers to entry for new competition. Because if someone wants to get into this marketplace of politics to offer new ideas, to say, hey, it's not okay that Congress isn't solving any of our problems, I'm going to run and I'm going to present an alternative view. Maybe I'm going to run as an independent. Maybe I'm going to run as a third party. Maybe I'm going to run as a Democrat. Maybe I'm going to run as a Republican against, whoever the incumbent is. There is no rational incentive to do that, because if you do, you are likely a spoiler, right? We hear this all the time, which is to say, don't vote for that person, because if you vote for them, you're actually going to take votes away from the person you like second best and inadvertently elect the person that you like least. And even if you're not going to spoil the race, at least your vote will be wasted if you vote for that person, right? It'll be wasted. So don't vote for that person. But even more often than the don't vote for that person conversation is the conversation that so many potential candidates have with themselves, which is to say, why would I get in the race? Because I'm just going to be a spoiler, or I'll be a wasted vote. So I'm not going to throw my hat in the ring to provide an alternative, because I'm never going to win. Again, it's rational, right? But it creates this really bizarre challenge, which is to say, politics is one of the only industries where we, as customers, as voters, right, in this industry of politics, we should be the customers. We should be the customers. We're regularly told that less competition is somehow better for us, right? You don't want more competitors. You don't want more talented candidates, because they're going to muck things up. And so let's just stick with the two that we've got. And that's a classic duopoly, right? This is actually duopolistic behavior that happens in other industries and then gets regulated. But there's no regulation of that in the industry of politics, because the regulators are the two parties themselves. So why would they do that, right? They have no rational incentive to change in a duopolistic competitive structure. So again, this is the problem that these two rules that we hardly ever think about in our politics create. So what do we do about it? We change them, right? So in our federalist system, states have the ability to change election rules. So we can change the way that we elect our members of Congress. So the first, what I'm going to tell you about today is the solution that we're working on for Wisconsin. We call it Final Five voting, and it's two things. So it's a change to that primary to fix the top problem, and it's a change to the general election to fix the bottom problem. And we're going to play our election game as we go, right? So the first change, I said, is in the primary. So if we move to the next slide, instead of going in and having to choose whether you're going to vote in the Republican column or the Democratic column on your primary ballot, you would see all of your candidates on one ballot. So tonight we saw all of our different candy options on one ballot, right? And we voted for our favorite. Didn't matter what party they were in, we just picked our favorite. And the top 5 vote getters are going to advance to the general election. Should I pause and see if we have results from our primary?
Yes.
Yes. I'm looking for Emily. Do we have results from our primary to announce at this point?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. We will continue. We will continue, and we will get our results when we move to Q&A, right? So in this primary, in this particular primary, which is not our candy primary, yeah, if you got any extras, fabulous. Right, so we voted for our favorite, and in this particular one, if you click Chet, my favorite in this election was the Green Bay Packers. I'll just disclose to you all my favorite in the candy election was Reese's. So there you go. That's what I voted for. All right, we move to the next slide. So what that sets up, this top 5 primary, is it sets up a competitive general election. So now we have the opportunity to actually have different candidates, maybe even from the same party, on our general election ballot. so that when we go in, we're not like plugging our noses and voting for the lesser of two evils. We go in and we tell you who we really like. So if you click again, I'm going to tell you that I really like the Packers because I liked them in the primary. So I'm going to like them in the general election. I'm going to vote for them. And I can stop right there and my vote is going to count just like it does today. But if I want to, I can also, if you click again, I can tell you that I also like the Bucks. The Brewers are fine. I don't really like the Madison Forward, and I definitely don't like the Admirals. So I can rank as many or as few of those candidates as I so choose. And it allows me to express my full preference on my ballot. And it also allows for candidates to hold each other accountable because we now have competitive general elections. Changes the entire dynamic of campaigning, but also of governing. So what this sets up, this is called an instant runoff general election. It uses a ranked choice ballot. It sets up this instant runoff general election, which I just alluded to, which is to say, in an instant runoff election, you count all the first place votes first. And if someone wins, if someone gets over 50%, right, if they have majority support, great, election's over and they win. But if no one has over 50%, we wouldn't want to inadvertently let the Packers win with like 23% of the vote. That wouldn't be fair or representative. So we go through these rounds of instantaneous runoffs. So automatically the person who comes in last is out of the race, and anyone who voted for them has the opportunity to have their second place vote counted. And so the votes are reallocated and we tabulate again. If someone moves over 50%, election's over, that person wins. If no one's at 50%, drop the person who came in last, reallocate those votes and count again. So again, it's just like a runoff election, which we all became very familiar with in Georgia in 2020. But instead of going back again to the polls a second time, you've cast all your votes at once and we tabulate them instantaneously. So that process allows for the candidate who wins to have the broadest support amongst the electorate. But even more importantly, that's right, again, that's very important from a representation perspective, but it matters when you think about governing too, because now the person who won is trying to win in this new system. So if you go back to that scenario of I'm trying to pass this consensus-oriented piece of legislation, I can think a little bit differently as an elected official. I can think, well, gosh, I'm an incumbent. I've been doing a good job. It's a top 5 primary. No one's going to be able to primary me anymore, right? I'll make it through that primary. And then in a general election, I know that the majority of my constituents actually like this policy or like what I'm doing. And so I can vote for it, because even if a small minority, right, if a special interest really doesn't like it, maybe I don't get their first place votes anymore. But I might get a coalition of first and second and maybe even third place votes to craft this majority win. So it changes who our elected officials are accountable to, both when they're running, but again, even more importantly, when they're governing. So that changes this fundamental Venn diagram, if you click to the next slide, right? So that there's an intersection between doing what we as voters, we as customers in this industry of politics want our elected officials to do, and their ability to get reelected. System should do if we want to produce some results that are good in governing. So this system, we call it again Final Five voting, realigns incentives for elected officials and makes it so that they can do what frankly needs doing in Washington, D.C. these days. So if we implement these two things together, right, the top 5 primary and the instant runoff general election, we have the possibility of getting some results. And if not getting results, we've got some possible accountability for not getting results, because we can run someone against them, right? Becomes a system of accountable governance and election and representative democracy again. So maybe this sounds kind of decent. I'm seeing some head nods in the crowd, right? But you might also be thinking like, this woman is crazy. She's promising this brand new system. And so let me just tell you, like, there's no silver bullet for democracy, and Final Five voting is not a silver bullet, right? I hate to disappoint. It's not going to solve all of our problems, because fundamentally democracy is messy, politics are hard, right? And our system is always going to be to some degree messy and hard, but right now it's messy and hard and there are 0 results. Right? So maybe we have messy and hard and some results sometimes in a system of final 5 voting if we realign some of these incentives, right? Because it's the Churchill quote that democracy is the worst form of government except all of the others. So this is what we've got. Let's keep working to make it better, right? Because that's our responsibility in our system of government, because the Constitution actually doesn't prescribe how we run our elections. Leaves that responsibility up to states. And so states have the responsibility, our state legislature has the responsibility to design our elections for Congress to make it so that they're incentivized to do work on our behalf. So I'm really proud and excited to say that today we've got some proof that this system is gaining traction. So just a year ago in 2020, the state of Alaska passed these 2 changes, passed an open primary and a ranked choice or an instant runoff general election by ballot initiative. So they're going to use this system of combined 2 changes for the first time in 2022. So we'll see how it works. This will be the first time. And prior to this, the system of choice voting has been used in municipal elections in our country for decades and in other countries for centuries. Because actually when experts, this is kind of shocking, when experts on government go out from the United States now to help form new democracies, they don't recommend our system of government. Right? So they have learned, it's time for us to learn that this system of plurality voting is not doing what it's designed to do. And places like Australia have been using a similar system to ranked choice voting for almost a century. Ireland has used it for almost a century as well, with what I would argue are much better results to show for their systems of government. So there's some proof in that. Just yesterday, most of us didn't vote yesterday in Wisconsin, but as you've likely heard on the news today, plenty of other places voted yesterday. And it was the single most ranked choice municipal elections that we've ever had. I believe it was over 30 municipalities that used ranked choice voting yesterday to determine their local elected officials, right? Because local elections are generally nonpartisan. So the top 5 thing is a little bit less relevant for a municipal election that's already nonpartisan. So ultimately, the system is gaining some traction. Even, you love it or hate it, what happened in Virginia, the Virginia nominee, the Republican nominee who won the Virginia governor's race yesterday was nominated through a ranked choice convention process. So even our political parties are starting to use this system because they're recognizing that to get a candidate that has the broadest appeal, you want to use a system like this, right? So let me just kind of end by giving you the Wisconsin update, which is to say, I think there's a slide for this if you click again, Chet. Yeah, so we've introduced legislation in Wisconsin. It's real here in our state to move forward this system of final 5 voting. We introduced it with bipartisan support. So we have 2 state senators, Senator Jeff Smith and Senator Del Coyenga, a Republican and a Democrat. In the Senate and in the Assembly, our 2 co-authors are Representative Tony Kurtz, a Republican, and Representative Danny Reamer, a Democrat. Very respected members. We've got 22 co-sponsors on the bill. They represent very different ideologies, but have come together to say that this system makes a lot of sense. So we're continuing to work on this. In Wisconsin, it's Democracy Found Action, the organization that I run's mission to lobby and support this on this bill, and our C3, Democracy Found's mission to talk about it, because this is a new thing. A lot of people haven't heard about it, but I will tell you, I go into a lot of rooms like this, and the amount of head nodding I get every time just fills my heart, right? Because we all know that, we all agree that it's not working, but so often the solutions that are presented to us are totally partisan, not necessarily in design, but often in impact. And so it means they're going to go nowhere, right? But this system, what I think is so beautiful about Final 5 voting is that it's nonpartisan in design and in impact. So it's not going to change a red district blue or a blue district red. So Republicans and Democrats don't have to be scared of it, right? It's just going to make sure that whoever gets elected in whatever the district is the person who best represents that district. And I think that's something we can all be pretty excited about. So why don't I just end there and tell you that, again, I think there's so much that could be done to improve our democracy, and there's certainly no silver bullet, but this is one very exciting thing that can be done in our state and that we're getting some traction over in our state. So if you are interested in getting involved, if you flip to the next slide, Chet, this is our website. Please get in contact with us. I also put some sign-in sheets over there. Leave your email if you want to join our list. I'll keep you up to date. I promise I don't spam. That's not our MO. Not a political campaign, so I will not send you 5 emails a day. But want to keep Wisconsinites up to date as to what's going on and how you can be supportive if you are so inclined. So with that, let me stop and see what questions you have.
Could it be Final Four instead of Final Five to go with it? Isn't that
That's the basketball thing. Yes, thank you, says the woman in the Wisconsin sweatshirt. I very much appreciate that. Yes, very good. On point question for your attire as well. Yeah, so actually Alaska passed Final Four. So the original thesis that Catherine Gale designed, and the other beauty of this is it's really a Wisconsin designed thing from the very beginning, right? It was a Wisconsinite who created this idea of combining these two reforms that already existed, but could be so much more powerful when you put them together. And her original proposal was Final Four. And based on the analysis and the research that we've done since that date, so for about 3 years now, we've realized that 5 is a more optimal number. So 5 is more optimal for a few reasons. One is that our brains have been shown that we can hold about 5 kind of real choices in our head at any time. There's this efficient frontier between what is going to both give voters real choice in an election, and if you imagine the other plane on the frontier, is not overwhelm them with too much choice to rank. 5 seems to be the optimal number. There also, according to political science research, is about if we were to be a multi-party system in the United States, there's somewhere between 4 and 6 factions that would represent different ideologies. So again, 5 is the number that we're moving for that kind of optimal results reason, but it does somewhat hurt our messaging from a, true basketball terminology. Yeah. Question here, and then we'll move across the room.
Question also.
Results.
We have some results.
Fabulous.
So maybe we could write the final 5 up on the board, and then I can start passing the forms out for when to rank those choices. And my question was, I guess, outside of that, what is the biggest kind of good faith opposition to this type of a reform? Because I'm curious what that would be.
Yeah. So thank you for the question, because it's kind of the most important one, because it's what we're up against, right? And what we're up against is, frankly, apathy and powers that be. So apathy from a perspective of, we all kind of think that this is normal, and so there's just this perception that it will never change. And that is perpetuated in part by those who know the system and run the system and win in the system, so why would they change the system? Just like any other change-oriented thing you might do in any other part of your life, right? The resistance comes from people who know how to do things in the current system. And so that's
not very good faith reasons.
Yeah, I mean, good faith reasons
According to you, at least.
According to me, they're not good faith reasons. Yeah, sure, you can see my bias there, right? But honestly, I'll tell you a story about the reasons, and feel free to throw the results. Do you want to say the results?
Sure.
I
can
and then throw them up here. It's much more exciting.
My handwriting is absolutely awful. If somebody else can volunteer to.
Emily's on it.
Great.
She's on it.
All right. So we had 34 total votes. Reese's Peanut Butter Cups came in at number 1 with a monstrous 12 votes, 35%-ish of the vote. M&M's came in at number 2 at 5, 15% of the votes. Snickers also at 5, so the chocolate party doing quite well. Toothbrushes, shockingly.
Yes.
Look at you, good citizens.
Came in at 3 votes, 9% at number 4. Twix came in at number 3, 9%. And then Skittles came in at 2 votes. Sour Patch, sadly, couldn't whip up enough votes for that one. Came in at 2, and Goldfish, all at the bottom at 1. Goldfish are delicious.
This.
All right.
So yeah. Now we will pass out some sheets and hopefully some pens.
Great. So now you get to rank of your top 5, right? If you want to.
I feel like that was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Absolutely. All right. So everybody is voting. I'll just, I'll vote I'll project my vote. Let's see. We're gonna go Reese's, Snickers, Twix, M&M's, toothbrushes. That's my order. What's your order? Write it down. I'll get out of the way. And then we'll talk more about opposition.
Can we do it right in?
You don't have to vote for all.
You don't have to vote for all of them.
Oh.
If you don't want to give toothbrushes anything, you don't have to. You don't have to. You can just vote for 1, or you can vote for 3, however many you want to vote for.
Is there a theory for not voting for all of them?
That's a great question. So the question, just to make sure everyone heard it, is there any theory as to why you would vote for only 1 or not all of them?
Got the ballot here? Sure.
So there's no reason to not rank all of your choices in this system. But, so there's no benefit to only ranking 1 or 2. But if you don't feel strongly, there's also likely no penalty for only voting for a couple, especially if they're pretty likely to win candidates. Because we can actually walk through how the tabulation occurs, but what happens is, as long as your first place candidate is still in the race, your vote is staying with that first place candidate. So, we know that Reese's is doing really well. If you just want to vote for Reese's, your vote's probably going to last until the last rounds. So your second or third rankings are likely never even going to come into counting, if I were to guess about how this election we're going to proceed. But the interesting thing about it, right, is that it allows for this degree of competition and collaboration amongst candidates in campaigning, because we no longer, right, so often in our elections these days, if it were, let's pretend it were just Reese's and toothbrushes. Right? The only thing toothbrushes would have to do is tell you how bad Reese's is. And the only thing Reese's would have to do is tell you how bad toothbrushes is. Right? And so you're actually trying to get someone to vote against your opponent rather than vote for you. And if you think about campaigns, you probably feel this in campaigns all the time, right? So because that's a rational incentive. But in this particular system, if I'm Reese's, I don't have really much incentive at all to malign the other candidates because I know I'm doing pretty well. And so I'm just trying to get their second place vote, right? So I'm trying to say, it's okay if you like Twix. Go ahead, vote for Twix. They're fine. But make me your second choice, right? So you can distinguish yourself from other candidates based on issues, based on credibility or resume, right? Some of these other things like candidate quality that really should come into play when we're deciding on who we elect, but so often don't when we're stuck in our two-party duopoly. So that's the dynamics changing. Let me finish answering the question about kind of what are the concerns that we hear against the system, and then we'll go to more questions because I know you all have a lot. So the concern that we get beyond, I mentioned the apathy concern and the we're never going to change anything because we have power sort of concern, status quo bias, right? We could just call it that, or I know how to win bias, however you want to frame it. The other thing is just this concern that it's going to be too complicated. And I would say this is often used as a foil, which is to say, politicians will say this all the time, voters will never understand this system, right? Voters are not capable of ranking their choices. Mm-hmm. And you can tell by my face, like how much patience I have for that argument, but it's because we rank things in our lives all the time, right? How hard was it for you all to rank this, right? It was not very complicated. You knew, well, maybe it was challenging, but you knew where you were gonna fall on this, because we do that. And so all of the evidence to date that we've seen out of municipalities that have been using ranked choice voting in local elections, which are the lowest information elections. Again, I'm talking to a lot of league people. You all know how many people show up for local elections and how low information they are, right? They're like, oh, I checked the league like responses before I came in, and then I came in to vote, right? These are not high information elections. And yet, New York City just was the biggest implementation of ranked choice voting in a primary election back in the spring, and 95% of voters said they fully understood what they had to do. They had no problem, right? 95% of voters in exit polls said they were totally fine, and 83% of voters ranked more than 3 candidates. And those who didn't rank more than 3 said it was because they felt like their candidate was strong enough that they didn't have to, right? It was a conscious decision not to rank. It wasn't like they didn't know. So a couple things that Final Five voting does to kind of address those concerns that we hear, and the degree of legitimacy. Sometimes there's been an election, we always rail on Minneapolis' mayoral race, where they had like 35 candidates on a ballot for mayor. 35 candidates on a ballot for mayor, and asked people to rank them. That's a lot, right? I mean, that's voters did it, and they were successful in doing it in Minneapolis, but Final Five voting pairs this change, as we were talking about the efficient frontier of what's the perfect number, which is to say, let's get to a manageable ranking amount of 5. So that's why in your primary, you just picked 1. And then in the general election, we allowed for that ranking to differentiate between the 5. The other thing that we're doing to overcome some of the barriers to getting this passed in Wisconsin is scoping it to federal elections only. So, right, federal elections are like the highest information elections other than president, which is a whole different beast because of how we elect presidents. So anyway, the U.S. Congress and U.S. Senate are the 2 races, or the 2 sets of races, ballots that our proposal would address, which is to say, it's the right place to start from a meaningful change perspective, because everybody agrees that Washington, D.C. is the most dysfunctional, and frankly, D.C.'s dysfunction is poisoning the rest of all the way down, right? Government. We talk about that. I'm opining here, but so you get a lot of bang for your buck in doing federal races, but you're also focusing on races where you have more earned media, you have attention to candidates, you give voters more information so that they have the tools that they need to go in and rank on that general election ballot. So those are the concerns that we hear when we learn about Final Five, when we talk about Final Five voting, and the strategies that we're trying to use to mitigate against those concerns. So the very pragmatic reality of this is that we have to get it through the state legislature in our state. We don't have binding ballot initiatives like Alaska has. So Alaska took this to the question to their voters, and their voters were like, yes, we want this system.
Why can't we do that?
We don't have that process. It doesn't exist in our state. It would take a constitutional amendment to give us that power in Wisconsin. And about half of the states don't have that process. We're not alone, right? We're not the only ones. But I think it's fair to assume, and actually the organization that I work for nationally, and some of my time, the Institute for Political Innovation, is working on other ballot initiative campaigns where voters can advance this reform, make it a little more normal, have some elections run this way, get people comfortable, so that when it comes to making legislative change in states like Wisconsin, there's just a little bit more appetite for it. The other thing that I would say is, even as we are making slow progress here in Wisconsin by introducing a bipartisan bill, we're contributing to the wins in those other ballot initiative states because we are proof that there's bipartisan support. There are elected officials with D's and R's after their names who have put their names forward as supporting this legislation together. So I think it's one of the only pieces of bipartisan election-related legislation in Wisconsin right now, to put it mildly. So that's really powerful from a messaging perspective, both here in our state for support, but also to get credibility across the country as this movement continues to grow. So again, you can tell how bullish I am on Wisconsin's Final Five voting effort and how important it is not only here, but also across the country. Are we ready for?
Sure. So we reached a
Results?
little bit of an impasse here and give some feedback.
Okay,
So
let's talk through.
we had our top 5, and then we cut off the final 2, and then we had their second choice votes together, and we got to the bottom choice. We took those first, and then we got 4, and then we got down to 3, and now we're at 16, 9, and 9. So
Okay. Well,
Oh,
how
so
many
neither
total
has
votes did we have?
50%.
34,
we're not
16?
at the majority yet.
Yeah. Well,
Two
This
crush
is-
parties making
Yeah, what
huge
happens
headways.
with that?
the Interesting.
She voted 6 times.
Interesting.
So we're down to Snickers, Reese's, and toothbrushes under the
You all, this is a way more dynamic election than I was expecting for us to have. I like.
No, I'm sorry, I lied. This was one of the ones that was added after that. It's actually M&M's. It's the 3 chocolate ones. Never mind. Sorry to give you guys also hygiene party
Can we review the ballots?
disinformation. I apologize.
So what do you do in that case?
So if there needs to, I can just pretend there's another vote.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Because not realistic.
Yeah.
Tie.
Yeah. I can talk about what we do about that if it were to happen. It's very rare.
Should we do here, I know how to do this.
It's actually.
Let's do a vote by applause.
Oh.
Which I think should be the real election reform. All right, who wants Snickers? M&M's. Giving bonus points to the woos. M&M's taken. So what we're doing now, I guess, is we're going to the Snickers pile,
Okay.
and then we're gonna take
Move them to their next choice.
their next choice
That's
down.
still in the race.
So the last 2, and hopefully we'll get to it.
Yes. The results continue. So, as the results continue, yeah.
Question, he made the statement that there was 34 ballots, so we didn't get a majority. But how many ballots does he have on this one? Because I, for one, didn't turn it in.
Sure.
So is there only 33 or 32 this time, and how would that affect it?
So, you didn't turn yours in
I
at
think
all?
somebody who
No,
didn't
the
turn
second
one in
time.
The first time must have turned one in because we do
I
have.
mean, we got 16. If only 30
Oh.
people voted,
Sure.
some of the 16 got the majority.
No, we had 9 and 9 in the other 2 piles. So
Oh,
we actually
okay,
had
okay.
34. All right.
So just in case you're wondering, in the very rare occurrence of a tie in our current election system or in the final 5 voting system, it is determined by lot, which is random.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
Oh.
Right, and that is in statute for our current elections as well as after recounting, right?
This
So
is
like we
weird.
go through these
Yeah,
processes, but
yeah.
that's actually the way statute determines these very, very unlikely occurrences of ties in our election system. All right, so I had a question in this neck of the woods, and then I had one further over. Yeah.
Well, it's not obvious to me why it's necessary to have a primary at all. Why can't you do this in a single ballot? Even if you only allow people to rank 5 choices, start there and do it in a single ballot.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the reason that we pair these things together is to get to a smaller ballot of choices in the general election. So to your point, it's totally possible, and other municipalities have done it in such a way. I just told you about Minneapolis, right? Which was to say you can have as many candidates as you want on the general election ballot. There is effectively no primary, and you just rank 5 or however many they let you rank. And political science literature to some degree should. A degree of competition, a degree of earned media, a degree of attention in a primary, and frankly, seeing how the chips fall in this primary is important from a voter education and voter engagement standpoint. So we're keeping that in order so that there would be this opportunity for people to see where you stand after that primary, right? And make it so that it's a reasonable number of voters to end up ranking in that general election. But that's what we believe, and what literature again has shown is where voters' minds can kind of handle that maximum number of choices efficiently. Otherwise, you do end up, sometimes they call them basically like people who don't fill out their entire ballot, so their ballot is exhausted when you go through the tabulation process, which is to say they didn't make enough extra choices that their ballot keeps transferring to their next choice. So if you want to mitigate against that challenge of ballot exhaustion, narrowing through a primary is an effective way to do that. So that's why that choice was made
But
to do it
even
this
so,
way.
I mean, it's not necessary to rank 5. You can rank 3.
Correct. Yeah.
But if you have 30
Yeah, but
votes,
if you,
so it'd
right,
be
you're
really
more
hard.
likely to rank more if you've got a smaller number than if you have a huge number.
You'd get overwhelmed, I
Right.
would think.
Yeah, that's what the challenge is, but are overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's just say that, every state adopted this program. And we were able to make it, there was a consensus and we did that. How does this work with the Electoral College in determining a majority, at least the way things stand now, when you might have 3 or 4 independent parties?
Yeah.
Or maybe it's 3 independent parties and then our traditional Democratic and Republican.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. So I mentioned that our legislation is specific to U.S. Senate and U.S. House races, and that's for a couple pragmatic reasons as well as political reasons. And one is to say the presidential race, the way in which the Electoral College interacts, it's not impossible to interact with a similar system, but you would need to do it slightly differently. So, for instance, the state of Maine actually did adopt something similar for dealing with the Electoral College in Maine. So, right now, there are only 2 states in the country that proportionally allocate their Electoral College votes. I'm going to the weeds because you all seem to like hang with me in the weeds. So apologies for those who are not hanging in the weeds. But so there are 2 states that proportionally allocate their Electoral College votes. Otherwise, it's just like if you win, you get all the Electoral College votes of the state. Maine was one of those states. So now they can proportionally allocate based on the rankings their electors to the Electoral College. So it means that those candidates, right, the electors are based on who won based on proportion in that vote. So it's feasible to do it. It's just there are multiple steps that would need to change in terms of changing statute to get that done. And in Wisconsin, that would be a whole other ballgame because you'd also probably want to change how we allocate our electors to make that more meaningful. So we just didn't even bite off that section of statutes for this first
Thank you.
attempt. Yeah. Here. Oh, I already had you.
Yeah, you
Yeah. Let me go back
Yeah,
into the
yeah.
front and then back.
Okay, it still has come, the role of primaries and how independents
Sure.
can get in there and if a standard blue and red party gets 2 on the 5 or how you work that, because I noticed Butterfingers wasn't even on the mix there. And I understand that Butterfingers is actually the favorite. And is there a place to write-ins?
Yeah. Great question. It sounds like Butterfinger did not collect enough signatures to get on that primary ballot because that is how you get on the primary election ballot, just like you do today. So we did not change, I mentioned statutes. Our bill for Final 5 in Wisconsin is trying to change as few statutes as possible. So the way in which you get yourself onto the ballot does not change under Final 5 voting. The change is that now, instead of independents going straight to that general election ballot, they get on the primary election ballot just like everybody else. So same signature threshold, same deadline of June 1st to collect your signatures and get on the ballot. And then there's also a write-in option. So in the primary, you could write in Butterfinger. Yes, and if you ended up, Butterfinger came in from behind and made it in the top 5, they'd advance to the general election ballot. And the same thing would happen in the general election ballot. There is a spot for a write-in. You can still only rank 5 candidates. So if you choose to use your write-in as one of your rankings, that's your choice as a voter. But again, we didn't want to in any way limit voters from the current kind of choices and abilities to get in front of voters that they do currently.
On some primaries, though, Republicans can only vote for the Republican choices and Democrats for the Democrat choices. Is that still, that would be totally.
That's the power of this change.
That
Thank
would
you
go
for
away,
saying
right?
that, because that is the key, I think,
Go away.
from a meaningful results changing perspective, that goes away, and that's hugely important. Because now you can vote for the candidate you like the best, regardless of what party they're affiliated with. And I don't know about you all, but if you've knocked doors in Wisconsin before, you've probably heard people say, well, I'm so frustrated because I want to vote in the whatever it is, Republican primary for sheriff and the Democratic primary for governor, and I can't do that because of this weird, you got to choose. So that goes away, and people can vote for their favorite candidate regardless of their party affiliation, and then it allows for meaningful competition, potentially even inter-party competition in a general election. So again, this allows me to reinforce the point that a red district is going to stay red, a blue district is going to stay blue, probably, right? In the near future, if you think about politics, if we're real politicking about it, the difference is now in a solidly red district in Wisconsin, you might have multiple Republicans to choose from. In a solidly blue district, you might have multiple Democrats to choose from. And if you are of the opposing party in one of those solidly red or blue districts, all of a sudden your vote starts to matter. Because right now, as we already determined, it doesn't matter at all in 86% of congressional races. So if you aren't of that party, who's going to ultimately win and voting in the primary? So now votes matter for all voters in a powerful new way, because the general election becomes the most important election, not the primary election. So that is the most significant incentive change from this system in terms of, real results. All right, question here. And then we'll keep going around the room.
I'm having a hard time trying to figure out how to phrase my question, but does this somehow mitigate some of the effects of gerrymandering? And how does it do that? That's what I'm trying to figure out in my head.
Yeah.
I can't get there.
Thanks for asking the question, because I said something that is sometimes a challenging thing to say in certain rooms, which is that the rules that matter are not rules around gerrymandering or term limits or money in politics. And depending on who you're talking to, right, those are like real blasphemous words. Mm-hmm. And the reason I said them is because I think, right, fundamentally it is true that if you have a system of final five voting where if your frustration, okay, let's put it this way. If your frustration with gerrymandering is the fact that we no longer have competitive elections because of gerrymandering, then final five voting certainly changes that, right? Because in a final five election, regardless of how the district lines are drawn, all of a sudden, again, the general election matters. So you have competition in that general election. You have potentially partisan competition in that general election in a way that gerrymandering, the impacts of gerrymandering, make it so that we don't have that right now, right? Right now, in so many of our districts, again, that's where the statistic comes from, that you know who's going to win based on who wins the primary. That goes away, and I would argue a more powerful way with final five voting, because in Wisconsin, so many of our districts, even if you drew them through some sort of nonpartisan process, they're not competitive from a partisan perspective across parties. They're going to be blue or they're going to be red. So it's really important from an accountability standpoint, if we believe that competition drives accountability, I do, then you actually do have competition in a general election, even in those solidly blue or solidly red districts in our state. So yes.
But if gerrymandering is working for the party in power, what incentive do they have to want to change
this,
it
because they've
to
got
be more
lifetime
competitive?
appointments.
Yeah.
I don't see how, and I'm not trying to be a naysayer.
No.
I get the concept.
Yep.
But it's working for me. Why should I change?
Mm-hmm.
Why should I change?
Yeah. I mean, when the question was asked about what's the biggest challenge, it's really that. It's the real politics of, if something's working for me, why would I change? Now, here's my answer to that, which is to say, it's not going to be working for them. So if you think back to the 2020 election and the shenanigans that happened because of plurality voting, So you had the Democrats doing everything possible in Wisconsin to get the Green Party candidate off the ballot in the presidential election. And you had the Republicans running to the Elections Commission to try to get Kanye West on the ballot, right? So this gamesmanship over third parties and independent voters in our state, as we're in this competitive space of, right, elections are won or lost by this small group of people swinging in Wisconsin, statewide in particular right now. So if you have, I called it mucking it up earlier, but if you have third party and independent candidates in these races, plurality voting starts to present a problem even for the parties who are in power, because people are so frustrated by the two parties. I mentioned the polling earlier today. They are so mad at both the Republicans and the Democrats from a party perspective that they are throwing their vote away on candidates who have no chance of winning. We saw this in even in the presidential race in Wisconsin. So the vote margin, the difference between Biden and Trump in Wisconsin was 22,000 votes. There were about 66,000 votes for the third party candidate. So, right from again, if you get to the real politic of it, this frustration with the lack of delivering of anything, and it's the almost like populism that's happening on both sides of our spectrum right now, is so frustrated by that, right? That they are not engaging in the traditional way, and they are, again, throwing their votes away for these fringe or non-traditional party candidates in such a way that it's going to have actual electoral consequences for our major parties. And that's where a system like Final Five is a solution that can allow them to, again, not give advantage to the other party, but allow them to deal with this frustration, because no longer are you saying like, oh gosh, keep that Green Party candidate off the ballot. You can say, fine, Green Party candidate, come on to the ballot. People who want to vote for that Green Party candidate, vote for that Green Party candidate. Just, if you're a Democrat, right, rank the Democrat second. And all of a sudden, it doesn't create that same election results potential problem for them when it comes to winning, which is ultimately, right, sometimes what politics is all about. I saw a new person with a question. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering, this is probably from your reading and research, it would seem as if our political campaign spending, and particularly at the federal level, is outrageous, and there's so much money. From your reading and your research, what do they project how this might affect campaign spending?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question, because it's an important one and we get asked a lot about that question. So fundamentally, Final Five voting doesn't change anything about limits on money in politics or anything like that. But if you believe that, again, this idea that competition matters in terms of where power goes, so bear with me for this for a minute, right? In our system right now, money is incredibly powerful, because in 86% of our races, we know who's going to win out of the primary. So if you put money in that primary for the candidate who's almost virtually guaranteed to win, your money has a very predictable return, because you know who's going to win. In a Final Five system, all of a sudden competition makes that return a little less predictable. So from an investing in politics perspective, you're disrupting some of the power of money and special interests by moving to a system like Final Five voting without artificially just capping the amount of money in politics. Because if you just cap the amount of money in politics, you don't change the power of that money in politics, right? You just cap the amount of money it costs to buy off someone in politics, like, right? You can put it in a really crass terms like that. But if you fundamentally change the competitive nature of politics and make votes more powerful than money, all of a sudden money still matters. Money will always matter in politics because it's key to getting your message out. It's key to all of those things. But votes start to matter more, which is a good check on the power of money in our political system. You haven't asked a question then? Yes. Yeah. Or go ahead.
So, practically speaking, since you're only looking at doing this in, national elections and state elections and not using it for municipal elections, is there a cost to having two different kinds of elections at the same time, whereas if you adopt it for everyone and get rid of primaries, by the way, you'd be able to take the incredible
Savings.
amount of money that's,
Yeah.
that's spend it on extremely low turnout primary elections.
Yeah.
And use that to pay for the voting machines that,
Yeah.
you know, that would use a single form of
Yes. It would not be a forum sponsored by the league without people who actually understand election administration. So thank you for that question. Yeah, so ultimately, we can run these two election systems at the same time. It's totally feasible from a systems perspective. One of the benefits of the fact that ranked choice voting has been used in so many municipalities to date is that all new election systems can process a ranked choice ballot. So anywhere that has upgraded their system somewhat recently has the technical capabilities to build a ballot that can be read, a ranked ballot that can be read through the machine. Now, as we all know more than I think anyone ever thought recently, right? Elections are very decentralized in Wisconsin, more so than in almost any other state in the country. So different jurisdictions are going to have different capabilities as to whether or not they could administer this system without any changes or without any upgrades. And so from a cost perspective, you're absolutely right. There is cost to upgrading your systems. Now, if your system hasn't been upgraded since 2000 when the original influx of money came in for elections equipment, it's probably due to be replaced anyway because it's at the end of its useful life. So, right, whether that cost is a cost that Final Five voting should bear or whatever, right, to be told. But the point is you can do it in an election system. You can also do it via hand count, as we learned tonight. It's a little bit more of a headache.
Flawless.
Yeah, flawless administration we saw in the candy election. But St. Paul and Minneapolis hand counted their ranked choice races for almost a decade. So it's possible to do it. Now, the question of why not just change entirely and get rid of primaries, I think that's just a political calculus question that couldn't be taken on at this time. So, I won't comment on.
I've tried to argue
yeah.
to people that the best way to actually get this in is to start with municipalities where you don't have party elections
Right.
and where you can make the case.
Cost
I mean,
savings.
the amount of money we spend at the city on primary elections where nobody shows up is just tremendous.
Yeah. I think the challenge is right to even do that. In Wisconsin, we have to pass state legislation. So either way, you're passing state legislation, which is a challenge.
Is there a timeline in putting this in front of the state? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Can you share that?
Yeah, so it's in front of the state legislature. We've introduced legislation, Senate Bill 250, Assembly Bill, I believe it's 233. 44 maybe. Anyway, it's on our handout there, and my card's on the table if anyone wants to be in touch. So there is legislation. It was introduced by bipartisan legislators. Now, I don't expect it to pass this session, being very realistic with you all. This is a brand new topic. It's something that most people haven't heard of, so it's going to take a little bit of time. But I'm really optimistic in the response that we've been getting. We started lobbying on this during the pandemic, and it was really, I was very concerned. We hired a lobbying team to help us do it. We were like, I don't know how this is going to go. We started doing the work in April of 2020. So legislators were in the middle of managing like really stressful stuff that had nothing to do with democracy at the time. And we wanted to talk to them about this brand new system of voting via Zoom. And they hadn't even been on a Zoom meeting yet, right? And I will tell you, we sat with so many legislators for an hour having this deep conversation about Final Five voting, and not from a perspective of like, we want you to support this yet, be public, but just like, we want you to understand this and think about it. And the degree to which they've done that just makes me really optimistic about the prospects in Wisconsin. Again, not immediately, but as we build the support over time, because there's just a rational case to be made that what we're doing isn't working. And even if their initial reaction is, I don't know, change is scary, change is hard, whatever we said, right? Why would I change something that I already am doing very well in? There's also an understanding that what we're working in is not working, and it's not sustainable, and people are not putting up with it anymore. And so having something that is truly systemic is something that's interesting for them at least to think about and consider and advance the conversation. Yeah, we'll go here and then we'll go back to you again.
Okay, well, I think it will have some chance of getting implemented because it doesn't affect them personally.
Yeah.
Because we're dealing with senators and congressmen.
You bring
So
up
they
a
could-
very important political point.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, so I mean, we like Venn diagrams at Democracy Found. Our co-founder, Catherine Gale, loves Venn diagrams. So you saw the original Venn diagram, but we also have a Venn diagram that is powerful and achievable. And it's important that those things intersect as well, right? We can have super powerful change that is amazing. And from a theoretical perspective, it could make a huge difference. But if it is not achievable, then what is the point of working on it? Right? From a very practical perspective. Again, it sounds sometimes harsh, but it's making those conscientious decisions to say, let's do what is going to be achievable. Let's bite off what we can to advance this work forward in a way that is still powerful, right? But is also something that can be done in a series of years and not decades. So that was the decision, hence the decision to focus on federal elections.
So, I'm a huge supporter of this. I have been for many, many years, mainly because of the spoiler effects of the plurality. It's crazy. However, if you're focusing on the federal elections, so Congress and Senate, sure, it's statewide. The gerrymander has no effect.
Right.
A vote counts all in. That's fine.
Yep.
But as you say, the blue areas are going to stay blue. The red areas are going to stay red. The congressional delegation is still going to be lopsided.
Yeah.
If everybody loves this and says, let's do this in the statewide elections, the assembly is still going to be 2/3 red when it's 55% blue in the voters. Shouldn't ending the gerrymander be job one? And isn't this a distraction from the real problem with our democratic
I'm
system
so
right now?
glad you asked the question because it allows me to say, I don't care about who gets elected. Right? But this is like, again, these are like a little bit blasphemous things to say in political circles sometimes. But I don't care about who gets elected because I care about what elected officials are incentivized to do when they are elected. So if you change their incentives, you could get different results out of the same elected officials without changing who gets elected. Because I don't know about you all, but I spent a decade lobbying on health policy prior to making this shift to working on elections. I don't work on elections reform because I'm particularly passionate, frankly, about elections. I'm particularly passionate about health policy. And there were so many conversations where behind closed doors, politicians will tell you, that makes total sense. Yeah, we should absolutely do that, but I can't do it because I'm going to get primaried. And so you have to change that dynamic. And then, again, it's not guaranteed that the results are going to dramatically change, but it at least allows for decision-making based on the general electorate. So that general electorate could still be a blue general electorate or a red general electorate. But I think it's really important that it is the red general electorate and not 10% of the red general electorate who's calling all of the shots when it comes to what elected officials are incented to do. Because there are so many policies in our state and in our country that common sense solutions, right, that have over 80% support when you ask the general public, but nothing gets done on them because it's the 10% on either side that are determining everything. So that's why I say I don't care who gets elected. And I think even if we elect the exact same people under a system of final five voting, we offer up the opportunity for them to act differently. And we do that by changing who they are accountable to, which is incredibly, incredibly powerful, especially when you live in a state that is so geographically partisanly separated, and effective polarization is one of the biggest plagues on our country, I think, right now. So in terms of getting anything done. So that's why I think it matters the most. But we can agree on that or not, right? But and these things aren't always mutually exclusive, right? But that's why it's so important.
I think it's the right idea at the wrong time. We're in the wrong place. But I hope you're right.
But right, but gerrymander. Okay, so like let me lean into this for just 1 second, and then we can move on to our results because I'm like we gotta also let people who want to leave. Right. So in Wisconsin, the impact of nonpartisan redistricting is a partisan impact. So it's not going to happen. The impact of Final Five voting is not a partisan impact. So it has a chance of happening. So that's why when I think about the achievable side, Final Five voting just feels so much more achievable and powerful from an incentives perspective. Again, if you're not focused on trying to get one side or the other to win, if you're focused on getting results that reflect the majority of voters, which ultimately I hope we're all about. So, do we have results?
We do, yes.
Toothbrushes for everybody.
Yeah. Toothbrushes came out of nowhere. Took the day. So our number one vote getter, Reese's peanut butter cups, did take it down, but that included 8 votes. That was not their top choice.
Wow.
A big move by the hygiene party towards Reese's. Had them as their second or third choice. So that was a big thing. So maybe the Reese's party could be like, bringing the toothbrush party into their coalition.
There we go. Thank you. Because you just illustrated, right, that even if we don't change who gets elected, by having this system in place, it gives whoever gets elected more information to say, who knew we had to pay attention to the toothbrushes, right? But all of a sudden we better pay attention to the toothbrushes because they helped get across that finish line. So that is a really meaningful change in terms of, again, who we're accountable to and results in our democracy. So with that, I'm going to pause and let anyone who wants to skedaddle. Thank you for coming. Thank you so much for being here. And just another plug, if you are interested in learning more, please take my card or sign up for our email list. And I will stick around right here for anyone who has conversation and wants to ask more questions.